Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of the GCNC Worldview. I am your host, Chris Day, as we take this journey around the world on all kinds of cannabis industry conversations. And this week is particularly interesting because we're delving into sort of emerging trends in different types of cannabis products. As we've talked to folks throughout Europe and Africa and South America and North America, of course, every different group and framework has different products that come on in different orders. But what's interesting about the category we're talking today is that it really is making a play into the stalwarts of um, beer and alcohol and how all of that interacts in the social construct that exists as people live their daily lives. So I want to welcome to the show Angus Rittenburg, CEO of Wherehouse Beverage Company. Angus is in New Jersey. The company's in Pennsylvania. I love that because just like me, it feels a bit nomadic. And so it's great to talk to you today, Angus. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, and excited to tell you more about what we're doing and what the industry in the U.S. is doing as a whole.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Angus, I've been looking a little bit at your LinkedIn profile, and we talked, of course, the other day a little bit about your background, but let's tell the audience how a guy that sort of started out working on batteries for Tesla, has a background in mechanical engineering, ends up designing um, cannabis beverages in North America. Tell us your story. What's your history?
Sure. So we started Warehouse Beverage Co. late 2020. We launched early 2021. But myself and my two co-founders, Casey Farzik and Sean Sheehan, were not actually cannabis consumers before this. But what we saw was a very quickly growing industry in the U.S. At that time, it was all THC derived from marijuana as opposed to hemp, which we'll get into later. But in 2021, you could only sell through dispensaries. And I think most importantly, you had to produce your products in each state that you sold. So when we looked at the category, we saw lots of different product forms growing quickly, but one that seemed to be struggling was beverage. And the challenge with beverage is the infrastructure required to produce beverages is very capital intensive. And without being able to ship across state lines, it created a bit of a discontinuity. It was very difficult to justify the capital expense to build a facility in every state, given the limited distribution through dispensaries in each state. So what we did is actually started from a sort of engineering approach, technology approach, and said, well, how do we make it financially feasible to produce beverages given the current framework? And what we ultimately developed was a way that we could produce beverages at scale in one facility in the US, undosed, do all the hard things in our facility, ship those across state lines because they had no THC in them, and then create a very simple machine that's low cost, portable, that we could use with existing license holders to just add the THC to the can in the market. And in that way, we could quickly scale to many markets without having to get licenses or build large canning facilities. Instead, we partnered with people that already had facilities, already had licenses, and just created a way to produce beverages for them very easily. We developed the original technology and it worked. The challenge then was we had nothing to make with it. And so that's where we started to think about what would be a good product, what would be a good brand. And the opportunity we saw in the early days was low dose beverages that would be compelling to alcohol consumers. Folks that hadn't built much tolerance, hadn't really tried these products, may have been nervous about due to them. And so we created a very low dose drink that was 0 calorie, no hangover. And originally it was 2.5 milligrams, which for any consumer, if they drank one, it would be very similar to the effect of beer. It wouldn't, it wouldn't really affect you heavily, but you had the option to stack them, have multiple, and sort of build the experience you wanted. So
Yep.
that's where we started. Things have evolved a lot since then, and I'm happy to to go into
Yeah.
the next
No,
steps
we
of the
will.
story.
First, I want to talk one about the ingenuity of the process because I think people spend so much time in the cannabis industry talking about the things they can't do, as opposed to saying, all right, but there's frameworks available that, we can use to make things happen. How do we accomplish our end goal? And um, I have often told people, hey, yeah, product can't travel across state lines, but brands can. And interestingly enough, your point, and I hadn't ever really presented it that way, but absolutely true, technology can too. And so if you have the tech or the brand in the States, you can certainly move that across state lines. I am curious about that point though, and that is, we're every single time we talk to somebody about what's happening in the US, there's always, well, when's it going to legalize, when's it going to change, deschedule, reschedule, all of that stuff. And I've gotten to the point where I don't try to predict that because it's a waste of time, but it will come eventually. And so how do you maintain your competitive advantage, as that comes down, knowing that your original tech was the competitive advantage was that you could navigate the system that existed at that point. How do you stay on top of it so that you stay ahead of the game as things change moving forward?
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point because as much as our original story was about technology, I think the lasting story and the thing that's kept us in business is just ability to adapt. Um, and so, what we've tried to do is work within the existing regulations, create creative solutions, working closely with regulators to make sure that they're compliant. In a lot of cases, what we were doing was unique and there were no rules written around it. So we got all the approvals we needed in each market, but that was very much of a education process, and being really open to regulators to come see what we're doing, really understand it. As we, built the business, we continue to work and adapt very quickly as regulations change. That's, I think, our core strength. But the other thing that we do is spend a lot of time working with regulators to try and inform the right regulation that we want in the future that ultimately is good for consumers. Many of the things that we push for don't make our jobs easier, but they do make these products better for consumers, make the whole category a lot more robust. So it's a combination of working within the state of things today, being very creative and very very quick to adapt, while also proving that there is a way to create a safe marketplace and inform regulations that are fair.
Yeah, and let's talk about sort of your flagship brands because we want to make sure to tell people what it is you're selling and where. So tell us a little bit about the products themselves and where you're currently distributing.
Yeah. So our original brand that we created was called Wink, and it was a play on the idea of this is seltzer with a wink of THC, a very small amount. And the original premise was let's create a product that gets the alcohol consumer into the dispensary. You know, it's good for the alcohol consumer because there's a introductory product into this new category. It's great for dispensaries. It's bringing new consumers in. The challenge and the hard lesson we learned over a couple of years of pushing these low dose products is alcohol consumers, it costs a lot of money to convince them to go to a dispensary where they don't otherwise go. And the majority of dispensary consumers are not interested in these low dose drinks. So in the first couple of years, we increased the dosage of Wink to 5 milligrams, but you know we didn't want to go higher than that because the whole premise of the brand was low dose. And so we created another brand called Countdown, and Countdown now goes from 10 milligrams up to 100 milligrams. And that's really the high dose brand. We continue to produce that product in dispensaries today. But what happened a year and a half or so ago is people began selling cannabis products that were derived from hemp, had THC derived from hemp. It's the same molecule, but it falls under a different regulatory framework. And with low dose beverages with THC derived from hemp, you can sell those through the traditional beverage distribution platform, meaning we produce the products at scale in our facility. We ship to beer, wine, or spirit wholesalers in each market, and they sell through liquor stores. So the state of the business today is the Wink branded low dose drinks are available right beside High Noon and liquor stores. Um, but many of the states have put caps on how many milligrams of THC you can have in those products in liquor stores. It's typically 5 or 10 milligrams, and so anything above that, we still use the technology. We still provide higher dose beverages, but you have to go to dispensaries to buy them.
Yep.
So we still play in both channels.
Yeah, again, it's part of that adapting to the market, right? I mentioned to you on our pre-call when I came back into the United States after doing sort of our European tour last year. I came into Pennsylvania. My sister lives there, and decided to do a road trip through the southern United States and into the Southwest and back up because um, there's a lot of these markets that technically are not legal for cannabis or some sort of um, hybrid version that doesn't really get us anywhere. But the hemp derived products were everywhere. Um, the hemp derived beverages, infused beverages that I had in Nashville, which is, in Tennessee, not a super cannabis friendly state, were actually quite good. And there was always a reason I sort of was against non-alcoholic beer, not because I'm against people drinking non-alcoholic beverages. I just always felt it wasn't done very well. And I was always questioning whether or not cannabis infused beverages would compete in the same way with cocktails. And certainly the product quality now and the competitive nature now is absolutely strong enough to compete without a doubt. So as you're seeing like the markets where there's the biggest uptick, which ones are performing best for you?
The markets that are performing best are the ones where there's clear regulatory frameworks to work within, and so the example you'll often hear is Minnesota. They came out, created a very reasonable framework that allowed low dose beverages to be sold in liquor stores. They're taxed appropriately, and so the end result is many brands, a good selection for consumers available where people are already buying adult beverages. Big tax revenue for Minnesota. There's third party testing requirements that are sort of governing the quality and ensuring that what's out there is good. And that's a very quickly growing market and a great marketplace. There's other markets that have been very unclear with the regulations, and they're kind of allowing people to operate however they wish. That's creating issues. And the biggest issue is there's high dose beverages available in places where you can't go to the register and learn more. And
Mm.
so you find as consumers buying products to try that are far too heavy handed. Many have bad experiences because the dosage is beyond what an inexperienced cannabis consumer should have.
Yep.
Um, and so that sort of damages the reputation of the category. But I think that in places like Minnesota, where there's an appropriate cap on the dosage, ensuring that consumers will have good experiences. But there's also places to find higher dose products where you can be educated on the products, in dispensaries with bud tenders explaining what these products do. It's generally a good thing, and I think a framework that would bode well for the U.S. as a whole.
Yeah, and I think, here we're often talking about the global dynamic and how these laws shift and change. Um, Sometimes what happens in the US is a precursor of things, and other times, we're certainly laggards. In this case, I think the predictability of how a market will grow when you add beverage is a precursor for what we'll see in a lot of markets over time. Um, you know, we're we're producing a trade summit in Peru in mid-October, and October 18th is the main day for those listening who might want to come join us. But they just passed a new hemp law in Peru within the last couple of months, and the framework is being sort of laid out now as to what that will exactly look like. And I think people are also trying to figure out what will happen as that rolls out in terms of infused, intoxicating products. And I have no doubt that we're going to end up talking about infused beverages when we're down there on the 18th of October. So, if you had a clean slate, the huge boom in hemp derived beverages hadn't already happened here and you could start it from ground one, like what would be the advice you'd give to international markets if they're exploring sort of establishing these types of frameworks? What lessons have you learned that you found particularly valuable?
Yeah. Well, I think probably the premise of everything I'll say is the benefit of beverages is they're self-moderating in a way. You can only consume so much liquid so quickly. And so by capping the dosage at a reasonable limit, you're sort of automatically limiting consumption and you're reducing the chances of overconsumption. That is, unique to beverage. So things like gummies, it's very easy to overconsume. When you look at, a traditional joint, which has about 150 milligrams of active THC in it when you inhale, it would take, 30 cans of Wink to do the same. Now you can't drink 30 cans of Wink in the time that you can consume a joint. So I think that's a very important criteria for everything that'll follow. When I look at the category, there's many consumers that do consume higher doses. They have higher tolerances. And so these drinks are not effective. And there's many reasons people consume that are generally good for their well-being. So there should be a way for people to get higher dose products once they're aware, educated consumers, or, those products should be available in places where inexperienced consumers can learn. And so what I think would have been wise for the US and still is wise for the US is to create a reasonable cap for beverage and to carve out where beverages under 10 milligrams can be sold through the traditional bev-alc channel. Traditional bev-alc channel is great because there's already age gating at retail. So, children aren't in liquor stores buying products. That's solved. There's a tax collection mechanism, registration processes, ways for there to become real entities that are regulated and tax revenue due collected. So all the mechanisms sort of exist for this to work. And in the end, there's huge tax revenue opportunity for both state and federal government with excise tax. But that's only, that only works at volume. You have to be selling a lot of these beverages. The challenge in the dispensary channel, the way that it's been structured in the US, is beverage is very hard to distribute. The processors that are licensed and have their established facilities, there isn't huge storage capacity available in the regulated spaces. And that's because most products are small format. Things like joints, distillate pens, gummies, these all fit in pretty small areas. Beverage is very challenging. On the retail side, there's vault spaces in the dispensaries. The product needs to be kept in overnight. Those vault spaces are quite small. So it's really hard for low dose beverages to push a lot of volume through these frameworks, which is fine so long as there's another avenue. And the bev-alc channel handles immense volumes of product responsibly. So what I think would be good for state and federal government, especially from a tax standpoint, is a carve out for beverage under 10 milligram to be sold through the existing channels. And then anything higher or other product forms should go through dispensary. It works well in that model. Consumers, can get more information in those stores. And I think that could work quite well.
Yeah, I like that idea personally as well. And even for those countries where, there's not a dispensary model, but there's via pharmacy and other places, well, the packaging won't be as sexy and the sort of consumerism that exists within the United States is likely to shift. I think creating those venues where you can put these products in the grocery stores, in the other places, but where there is always going to be the checks and balances that exist within these markets. It just proves to the world that, hey, the sky doesn't fall when you legalize products. You already have figured out actually how to do this. It doesn't have to be scary and intimidating. And really, if you look at the health benefits versus detractors, having cannabis infused beverages, hemp derived or not, is actually oftentimes a safer and easier pathway than certainly than liquor, but even often beer and wine. And so I'm a huge advocate for governments and policymakers to look at this through the practical lens, not the propaganda lens, as much as possible. So,
Totally agree. And for consumers going into a liquor store to see a product, like Wink right beside High Noon, where the sort of buzz that you get when you drink it is similar. A can of Wink has a similar effect as a can of High Noon. You see these two products, and one's 0 calorie, no hangover, but a similar price. It creates a real buying decision. Consumers are very interested in this category, and what we're seeing in markets that do create clear regulation and allow this is many consumers are maybe not switching entirely, but using these products for different occasions. So replacing their glass of wine, replacing their beer on weeknights for these THC infused beverages.
yeah. So, as things move ahead and sort of doing the crystal ball thing, looking forward, um, what do you think the long-term expansion plans are for Warehouse and Wink and Countdown? Like what's the big picture goal for you guys as you expand?
Yeah, well, we do. We still do produce a whole subset of products that are higher dose and sold through the existing dispensary channel. I expect that will continue. I expect there to still be interstate commerce issues at higher doses for a long time. Um, the low dose side is really interesting because it's growing extremely quickly. The rules are changing state by state very rapidly, and what we will continue to do is absent regulation, do what we believe is right. So always selling through age-gated retail, always third-party testing every batch and making those test results available to the public, and informing regulators of what we've seen work in the marketplace. The benefit of the U.S. is you got lots of individual states that are free to regulate however they see fit, and so there's lots of little experiments going on, and increasingly there's public data for people to say like, well, how did it do? And I think to date, Minnesota's has been the strongest and most successful program, but there are more and more states coming in with similar types of regulations and seeing a lot of success. I think the U.S. will be the ultimate testing ground, and I hope
Yes.
everybody can watch and see what's working and create appropriate regulations.
Yeah, hopefully watch, learn something good, and also, figure out where we do missteps and adjust accordingly. So, Angus, I really want to thank you for coming on today. It's been great talking about this. For our listeners, we're doing a webinar through the Global Cannabis Network Collective in a couple of weeks on branding and marketing, things that you can do, not things that you can't. And Angus, I was looking at the Wink and Countdown branding and sort of how you guys have put that brand out there over the history of the product, and it's really good, man. I spent 25 years in ad agency land before shifting into cannabis 10 years ago, and I love seeing the evolution of brands and how they communicate with people. So for those of you who maybe haven't seen it out there yet, go to whbev.com and check out their products and their branding and try them out if they're in your market, because it's really it's really a neat emerging category. And I've had the chance to try a number of beverages in the space, mixers, cocktails, off the shelf, and I love seeing the diversity of products that are emerging in this space. So, Angus, thanks so much for joining us, and thanks everybody for tuning in today.
Thank you. Appreciate the time and the opportunity to tell our story.
Of course, let's do it again sometime soon as things continue to
Okay.
evolve.
Sounds good. Thank you.